What's going on, everybody? Let me go check it on Facebook real quick and make sure we sound okay before we start the podcast. I'll bring the guest up. Yep, we sound pretty good. All right, I just want to get a few things out of the way from my end on the housekeeping side of this, and then I'll bring Matthew Durham up. If there's ever a podcast that's going to get us canceled, this will probably be it because we're going to talk about a taboo subject that certain people are allowed to talk about, and I don't mean by color. I just mean if you're on a certain side of an argument, you have permission to talk about it. And a lot of times, if you don't, then you don't have. If you don't have those viewpoints, you're not allowed to talk about it. And that's, I know it goes both ways, but I don't think that means that we should self-edit, self moderate ourselves if we have something we think we can contribute, or if we have genuine questions like I do in this conversation, then I think we should be able to do that. Couple things. First of all, I just want to get out of the way. Um, and where's it? Oh yeah, I critical thinking, because we're going to talk about critical race theory. Critical thinking, a lot of times everybody wants to be a critical thinker. I don't think we want kids to grow up and not know how to think critically about things and add different perspectives and all that. But critical race theory is not the same. And one of the things we're going to touch on today are, and let me pull this up because I've got it pretty well mapped out. We're going to talk about the philosophies and the foundations of CRT, the historical progression from Marxism and Marx and how it's kind of changed, some of the definitions and how to look for it as it's moved into our curriculum in schools, our businesses, our social media, rules and regulations, journalism, entertainment. We're going to try to talk all about this and work our way through it, knowing some of the questions I ask are coming from a naive perspective. Sometimes I think I know something and I ask it, and I might be kind of right, I might be all right, or I might be wrong. So if you hear me ask a question you don't agree with, or like, why would he ask that? My intent is to actually get answers. And I know the guy I'm bringing up, and I'm going to give him a chance to do his qualification, his disclaimer too, is if he doesn't know the answer, he's going to say, I don't know. He does not the person that makes stuff up. And we are going to be adding our narrative and opinions in this a little bit. And that's okay too. We all have opinions. One of the things that has frustrated me, and then Matthew Durham is coming up, we have gotten into this place to where if you're not a veteran, you can't talk about the military. If you're not a woman, you can't talk about abortion. If you're not a person of color, you can't talk about race. If you're not you insert the self-imposed narratives here. And my theory on this is, like with everything, it's not all true, right? That's not true. I should be able to talk about things that affect the world that I navigate in. My kids are going to grow up and have to deal with, which means I should be able to talk about race. I cannot tell somebody what it's like to be another race, but I can talk about how we all interact. I can't tell a woman what it's like to be a woman, but since they're a big part of my world, I can actually have an opinion on stuff. And that goes to policies and education, because at the end of all of this, we're neighbors. We go to church together. We buy groceries together. We've got to interact with each other. And we got to find a way to do it with maybe some disagreements. And so there's my disclaimer. I'm sure that I've missed something that somebody will send me an email and call me a name. That's okay too. If you don't know me that well and all you can do is call me names, and kick rocks. Go find people that know me and talk to them. Well, I don't know about that. I got a lot of people think I'm an asshole too. So hold on. Let's just bring Matthew up. Nobody thinks he's a jerk. Nobody. 3, 2, 1. What's up, Matthew Durham?
Hey, how you doing, Clint?
Nobody thinks you're a jerk, man. I made that bona fides right there.
Nobody at all. Never happens.
Nope. He never fought with his wife, his
Nope.
kid. Yep. I mean, she just knows you're right. She doesn't even ask questions anymore.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah. I'm
Well,
not
now you've just
persuasive.
lost all credibility. He has just claimed to understand women, and now
Mhm.
everything he says after this point is a big but, right? No one believes it. Do me a favor. We're going to talk about kind of I don't know why, but it is a touchy subject nowadays. Tell everybody who you are, and then I'm going to start off with a question about CRT. And when I say tell everybody who you are, use that as a time to disclaimer, sources you used, anything. The next couple minutes are yours.
Sure. So, hi, everyone. My name is Matthew Durham. I am a research project manager at the University of Tennessee in Chattanooga, where I received my master's degree in psychology, focusing on research, as well as my undergraduate degree in philosophy. I work as a project manager on a study that has been going on for over 20 years at this point, looking into how people's worldviews and their faith develops over time. So we've re-interviewed people multiple times. It's one of the most fun things about what I do is listening to people and their perspectives and especially when they're very different from my own. Before all of that, I worked in cancer research for about 8 years. I am also currently, you might say, maybe a journeyman or something like that in terms of homesteading. And philosophically, I was sort of raised within the Enlightenment liberalism tradition. So, for example, when it came to issues of race growing up, in all of the schools that I went to, no one cared. People dated across racial boundaries. We didn't have racial segregation in terms of friend groups. Um, it was just a very granted, I was going to small sort of private religious schools, so
Right.
maybe that's a different context than what some people were dealing with. But um, that's sort of where I come from, and the lens that I view to this. Um, for some of you may be wondering, why the heck is someone who studied psychology and philosophy any kind of why should we listen to him on the basis of on the topic of critical race theory? um, well, you certainly don't have to. I'll try to persuade you that there's some value there. um, I'm using my psychological and philosophical training to to study this particular material. I've been reading it for several years. Some of my sources that I'm going to use here, I've used both pro and con sources. The sources in favor of critical race theory include Critical Race Theory: An Introduction by Delgado and Stefanchik, written in 2001. Critical Race Theory: The Key Writings That Formed the Movement, which is a compilation of writings put together in 1996. It is sometimes referred to, or often referred to, in the critical race theory movement as the Big Red Book, which those of you who are familiar with Mao may recognize the direct allusion to his Little Red Book. Also, I'm specifically drawing from some smaller papers like Kimberly Crenshaw's Mapping the Margins, Cheryl Harris's Whiteness as Property. On the con side, the big ones that I'm drawing from are Douglas Murray's War on the West from 2022, Ramaswamy's A Nation of Victims, also 2022, James Lindsay's Race Marxism, also from 2022, and John McWhorter also wrote a book that was pretty influential for me. For whatever reason, my brain is forgetting.
What's his name again?
John McWhorter. He's a linguist.
Yeah, he's an American linguist and the elect anti-racism
Woke
movement.
racism. Yeah, it's called woke racism.
Woke racism, yeah.
Yeah. And that came out, I want to say, last year as well, 2022 or 2021.
And I'm looking at him. I think I've actually heard some of his, but he's an African-American gentleman. Am I correct? Am I looking at the right guy?
Yes, he
Yeah,
is.
okay, yeah.
He does a weekly podcast with
That
another.
may be where I've heard from him.
Yeah, with Glenn Lowry.
Okay.
McWhorter is a sort of more of a traditional liberal, and Lowry is a bit more to the right than he is.
Right.
I think it's fair to call him a conservative, but he might bristle a little bit, maybe. I don't know. So yeah, those are my sources. I'll refer to other things as well throughout this discussion, but those are sort of some of the. If you're looking for an introduction, all of those are good. They're both from the perspective of those who advocate for it and those against it. The most technical of all of those is going to be Crenshaw's Mapping the Margins paper and Lindsay's Race Marxism.
So I also want to say that this is not at all to deny racism exists. It's not to deny the evils of countries, not just in the United States, throughout the history of the world. One group of people can look at another group of people based off the color of skin, the tribe they live in, the geographic area, the religion you believe. I am not saying that. I'm not saying that there's not privilege that comes with any one of those things if you take a snapshot in history. I'm not saying that. What I am saying, though, is that it is important to have these conversations out loud because my stance, and then here comes the question to you. We'll start it off with the question. My stance is, of all the nations that have tried to navigate, manage, massage the evils of men's hearts, I think the United States and the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, has done it the best so far. I'm not saying we're not done evolving, hopefully, as a society, but it's hard to look back on it, and there's no magic button. We seem to judge people, the world they lived in 200 years ago, and say, well, that's who we are, and it's not who we are. We've come a long way. I am afraid there are philosophies, there's ideologies that are getting fed into us now, that their goal is actually to reverse, to go back, to pull us apart. And by pulling us apart, and then I'll say this, and you can agree or disagree with the question that's coming, but by pulling us apart, smaller segments, it's really easy to control, manipulate, pit us against one another. Once I have set of 300 million people, I have you in categories. And then I just feed y'all all the same feed, and y'all can fight each other, and I get to control because I've got all the answers. It's a simple way of looking at it. Is that part of you, how you see this too? And then take this opportunity to just, what is CRT? What's
Yeah.
its
I
philosophy,
mean,
its foundations?
sure. No, I agree with you that the way that the Constitution and sort of um, Western society, Western liberalism has functioned is through this idea that it takes a while for humans to learn. Right? We make incremental progress. And it's sort of modeled after the way that humans as individuals develop. You're young, you start learning things, you start integrating those ideas, and you continue to learn throughout your lifetime. So that ideally, by the time you're 50, you're a better person than you were when you were 30.
Right.
And that's the sort of the ideal that we're operating from in a Western liberal Enlightenment tradition. Um, that is not the way that critical race theory sees the world, and we'll get into that. But it is opposed to the incremental approach to change and development and improvement. What is it though? So one of the things I really want to make sure that I'm doing in this conversation is that I am expressing the perspective of those with whom I disagree in a way that they would accept.
Okay.
Um, that is in fact what my entire master's thesis project was about, was studying how that affects our perspectives of each other when we can actually um, express their perspective to their satisfaction. So if I screw that up, then I encourage our listeners to give some feedback on this. So I'm going to provide a couple of definitions that are a little bit useful, and then I'm going to also pull directly from someone else. Then this is the third one is not my definition.
Okay.
In fact, the first one is also kind of not mine. I'm mixing and matching to a degree here,
That's
but
okay.
hopefully they would all agree. So the first definition is the belief that racism is the fundamental organizing principle of Western society.
Okay.
It is central to understanding inequality. Number two, critical race theory is a Marxian conflict theory of race in which the holders of bourgeois racial property, which they call whiteness, will intentionally or unintentionally hoard it to their benefit and to the detriment of non-whites, especially Black or African American people. And the last one, this is directly quoting from Lindsay's race Marxism book. Critical race theory is what it does. And what it does is calling everything racist until you control it. So that's the definition that I think the critical race theorists are going to disagree with. But we can get into why there might be some disagreement there and why I would still argue that Lindsay is correct on that.
Do you think it would be a good place to now that we have the definition sort of out there, like where did this stem from? And here's why. I'm going to say this. I'm not. You don't have to answer this question now, but I'm going to throw it out there because by the end of the show, I think we're going to try to answer this maybe in a clumsy way. We hear all the time, CRT is not part of the curriculum. We are not using that for business re-education purposes. It is not part of that. It is not out there. That's the gaslighting by the Republicans or the conservatives. So before we can answer, is it being used in today's world? I think it's important for us to know where it came from, what it kind of looked like, and what's its purpose initially. Like, where did this little fire ignite, and when did it start getting called CRT? Do you have that info?
I think, yeah, I think I can certainly shed some light on that.
I
So
hope so. If not, we are screwed in this conversation, dude.
and just as a preview to the question of is it in our educational system and how would I demonstrate that to someone who is either sure that it is not or
Mhm.
isn't sure and is looking for clarification. There's some two very easy ways that you can demonstrate that with, I would argue, absolute confidence.
Okay.
But we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Hopefully that will be useful to people.
That's very good. You teased. You kept people in. I like it. All
Yeah.
right, man. Yeah, good job. You're a podcasting pro. All right. So where did this thing start from and what's its tenets?
So this is something that there will still be some disagreement on, but at this point, I think it is unavoidable that critical race theory is a Marxian theory. Um, those of you who have studied your history will know that Marxism, developed by Karl Marx, was a theory of conflict between the proletariat, which is to say the sort of the working classes, the non-property owners, and the bourgeoisie, who were the property owners. It's an economic theory, if you want to call it a theory,
Right.
where the ultimate solution to the problem of class oppression is to abolish private bourgeoisie property. That was when Marx went to uh, summarize communism. He said it's the abolition of private property.
Okay.
It is a conflict. Marx used what he called a conflict theory, which is this notion that the best way to understand inequality and oppression is through understanding that the world is structured by the powerful, by the bourgeois, um, against the proletariat, against the working classes, through their possession and hoarding of private property.
And it pits the oppressed against the oppressors, basically, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always, a conflict theory pits the oppressed
Right.
against the
And
oppressors.
we would be
That is
better if there was no private property, right?
because then you eliminate oppression,
Right.
because you eliminate the means through which that oppression can be created.
Gotcha.
So that's sort of the foundational structure that we're going to be drawing from here. Um, the differences, critical race theorists do not advance or don't like old school economic Marxism. They refer to it as vulgar Marxism because they believe that it does not appropriately center race as the fundamental organizing principle of Western society.
Okay.
What their argument would be, as best I understand it, is yes, there's economic um, differences between people, but if that's all you're studying, you're not getting to the core of the problem,
Mhm.
which is discrimination based upon race. That's where it's sort of economic differences are an outcome of that. So they replace class with race as sort of the core analytical piece, the core construct. They are also focused on abolishing bourgeois property. They just replace it with they just switch out sort of economic property, land, means of production, that sort of stuff, with what they refer to as whiteness.
Okay.
They are not using any of these terms in a way that we would use them in general conversation. The word critical, the word race, and the word theory are all used in particular ways within their context that if you use them expecting that they mean what you mean, you're not connecting with what they're
That
saying.
we've talked about this before. Definitions of words matter. If I'm saying critical and you're saying critical, and
Mhm.
I'm assuming that you and I are both meaning the same thing, we can get pretty deep into the weeds on this and all of a sudden come to a disagreement and not realize that we diverged about 6 miles ago. And how did we get so far apart? And we're like, well, because I thought we were on the same page, man. We were saying critical thinking. Yeah, but I mean something different by it than you do.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And real
Um,
quick, and this is how it's going to go because I don't want to. I got questions as you start giving out information. How do they address? Or and again, I don't know is a good answer if you don't know, but you go back to European the world before the races were as mixed as they were, right? Back when everybody was more landlocked or they were more isolated. and you had oppressors and oppressed then, but it was based off class and money. You had the kings and the servants. You had then you had the peasants. The Monty Python made skits on this where the getting carried by in carts with people out digging in the mud, and come see the violence inherent in the system, that kind of stuff. And my point on that is just replacing race with money. It seems to be convenient, but it seems to me oppressors use whatever they can to oppress, and it's whatever's basically the easiest to use. Am I making sense on that?
Yeah. I to be honest, I have not seen much critical race theory that goes back beyond sort of the beginning of the Enlightenment order.
Okay.
They really confine their criticisms to Western liberal humanism.
Okay. All right.
There may be examples of that I'm just not aware of, so I'll leave that open.
Well, I'll break it
Yeah.
down easy, East Ridge. Assholes are assholes, and they're going to find the easiest way to have power over you, whether it makes it, even if it's, you can call them a racist, but it may be that they just see an opportunity to gain power, or it may be money, or it may be, I live on the hill and you live in the valley. They've written songs about stuff like this. But all right, continue on. You were laying out the principles and the definitions and tenets. I apologize.
So another key thing to understand about how this is how critical race theory is structurally similar or even identical to Marxian theory is the solution that it provides to the problem, which is you must develop some form of critical consciousness. So in Marxian theory, this would be you have to be able to see the oppression for what it is. And the way that you do that is by developing a critical consciousness. You must study, understand, and then implement the ideas of the Marxian theory that you are studying. So, and the reason why it's so difficult for this for non-critical race theorists, in their own opinion, to see all of this oppression is that it is invisible. It is woven into sort of the fabric of our entire society through language and art and culture and law, education. Everything has been infused with this as a means for the racial bourgeoisie to protect their own privilege. So it's kind of like how a fish doesn't know it's wet.
Right.
Those of us without a race consciousness will not know how oppression functions within our society, whether we are an oppressor or a member of the oppressed class.
Is this when you see people, the talking heads on the cable show, say things like, you can't be anti-racist? What is it? You have to, people that say they see no color. I don't see color. First of all, I disagree with that too, but for a different reason. In other words, it's not okay just to be, I'm not a racist. You have to be anti-racist. Does that make sense? Or am I being too vague?
No, you're not. That's a good example. That would be Ibram Kendi in his book "How to Be an Anti-Racist," which came out in 2019, where he's making the argument that it's not possible to be neutral. You can either be on the side of the oppressor or you can be on the side of the oppressed. The only way to be on the side of the oppressed is to develop that race consciousness, so that you can see the hidden oppression.
Gotcha.
They would argue also that. Well, actually, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. We'll wait on that.
Yeah.
If you need more than just the structural similarities with Marxism, there's a couple of, I think, good examples from critical race theorists themselves that speak to this connection directly and agree that it is fundamentally Marxian. So Richard Delgado, who I referred to as one of the authors of Critical Race Theory and Introduction, he's one of the original critical race theorists. He did an interview with the Seattle University School of Law in 2011. And I'm just going to read a portion of that interview where he speaks to the origins of critical race theory. He says, "I was a member of the founding conference. 24 of us gathered in Madison, Wisconsin to see what we had in common and whether we could plan a joint action in the future, whether we had a scholarly agenda we could share, and perhaps a name for the organization. I had taught at the University of Wisconsin, and Kimberly Crenshaw later joined the faculty as well. Crenshaw being the mother of CRT.
Mhm.
The school seemed a logical site for it because of the Institute for Legal Studies that David Trebek was running at that time, and because of the Hasty Fellowship program. The school was a center of left academic legal thought, so we gathered at that convent for 2.5 days around a table in an austere room with stained glass windows and crucifixes here and there. An odd place for a bunch of Marxists. And worked out a set of principles. Then we went our separate ways.
Hmm.
So he's specifically referring to the founders of CRT as a bunch of Marxists.
Right.
Now, that by itself may not be enough to demonstrate that CRT is Marxist. They could have
Right.
created a theory that was not Marxist, right? However, Charles Mills, 2003, in a collection of essays called From Class to Race, Essays in White Marxism and Black Radicalism, does explicitly connect critical race theory with its Marxian roots. So here we have some very strong indications, one, by virtue of them self-identifying as Marxist, and two, the direct philosophical connection made by Charles Mills in the essays that he collected.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no,
I
that's
was
right.
just going to throw this in there. It's related somewhat. The circles overlap a little bit, but the founders of BLM came out as trained Marxists. You know, the videos got pulled down kind of quick, and then I think they've resurfaced now. But I don't think at times I'm trying to put this in a good way. If I'm a Christian and I am asked to make decisions, I'm probably one of the filters I may use is I make decisions based off my morality, and the thing is the Christian filter. If I'm insert whatever it is here, it's hard to remove that. If you're a self-proclaimed Marxist, then a lot of the stuff, you know, that you filter through is going to come through that filter. Plus, you get to start seeing the actions of people and what they're putting in place. And when, you know, 1 + 1 = 2, you go, okay, well, that equation makes sense then at that point. I know that's a little bit of a tangent, but I mean, it's still just trying to make it to where we see it now in real time. That everybody go, it's not Marxism, it's not that. And I'm like, they dismiss it because I think it's uncomfortable, but it seems to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect, most people should expect that if Matthew Durham is doing a new study or writing a paper, he's going to do it within sort of the philosophical context that he advocates, the tradition that he comes from.
That's right.
Right. And if I'm not, then you would expect that I would say that somewhere. Right. I've changed my paradigm for the purpose of this. Right.
Yeah.
So it stands to reason that a bunch of Marxists would create a Marxian theory of race.
Yeah.
And certainly Charles Mills agrees with that.
Well, and two, it would seem also, if anybody hears a dog barking, I'm keeping my son's dog. So if y'all can hear that, I apologize. But also, too, is if they were writing papers that were public without the disclaimer, then all of a sudden I think you would see public some of their cohorts going, hey, what's going up with this? This, you know what I'm saying? We just don't see that pushback. So you tell me I want to make sure we put all the philosophical foundations and starting point of this in place before we start doing the historical progression as it kind of ignited from the Marxist thoughts, then how it started moving through society.
So actually, this is a good point to jump to that, the sort of the historical progression piece.
Okay.
The next big piece after Marx would be Max Horkheimer from the Frankfurt School, who wrote a lot, but he came up with the notion of the critical theory in his 1937 essay named Traditional and Critical Theories. In that essay, he differentiated a traditional theory from a critical theory in this way. He said that a traditional theory is sort of the standard way that you use to understand how the world is. I'm really paraphrasing here, but right, it's the means of understanding how the world functions, what it is. It's the sort of how we figure out what the facts are. A critical theory, on the other hand, is a moral criticism of the way that the world is, and it develops a means through which we can change it. So it is effectively, it's an activist approach using a moral criticism to start. Um, and one of the main points that he argued is that critical theories are indispensable because the current system that we have cannot be criticized from within it. You can't use the tools that the system has developed to criticize the system itself. You have to be able to step outside of it.
Okay.
And the way that critical theories propose that we step outside is by developing that critical consciousness.
That's what I was okay. Good. Yeah.
So, we're like, this is, if you're familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave, a more recent example is actually maybe the most accessible to our audience, The Matrix. Right? So Neo doesn't know that he's inside of this system that oppresses him.
Right.
The only way that he can understand it is by stepping outside of it and then coming back in as an outsider. So Neo exiting the Matrix, right, taking that red pill, is Neo developing what they would refer to as a critical consciousness.
And if you remember that movie, which I love those movies, as long as he's in that system without being aware that he's part of it, he's really helpless. He's just reacting to things around him, noticing those little those things around him. But once he steps out and comes back in, now he can use the knowledge he has against the system. That's the only way he can actually start fighting the system, is once he steps out of it, learning how it's operating, then going back into it with a different set of knowledge and skills.
Yeah, I mean, the,
Yeah.
the system in through the mechanism of the agents can take over individual human minds within it
Yeah.
and use them for its own purposes. Right, that would be what they would refer to as complicity. Right,
Mm.
that you're so unaware that you are supporting the system that it can completely take over you, and you are your behaviors, your perspectives, your personality are all determined by the very structure of the matrix that you exist within.
This, and I'm going to say it out loud as a statement, you correct me. This is how you can get Larry Elder being called the new black face of white supremacy. This is how, when people go, how can that person be a racist when they are of Hispanic descent or African American descent or whatever? How can someone be a misogynist if they're a woman? And all of a sudden, when this critical theory is tweaked for whatever narrative for oppressor it needs to be, all of a sudden it doesn't matter really if you're part of the group that should be oppressed. If you don't see it yet, you're part of the oppressors.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Either directly or
Or
indirectly,
indirectly.
right?
That's, you don't, Larry Elder doesn't know he's racist against his own people. He doesn't know that. He just, right? He's just part of the matrix.
Right.
He's not good enough to be out of it yet, so he can see his how he's being used.
Correct.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. I'm with you. Thanks for dumbing it
All right.
down and using Matrix now. See,
No,
this is what I needed, dude.
I love the Matrix.
God, I hope he comes up with some Caddyshack analogies or Back to
Yeah.
School or something. Maybe The Office. I'll really start being smart then. Clint, it's just like Step Brothers now. Did we become best friends? All right, keep going, dude. Sorry, I interrupted.
That's all right.
All right.
Yeah, like the Matrix is a fantastic allegory here, and it's very useful for most folks. So I hit upon that idea a day or two ago for this conversation. It's like, oh, that'll work. That'll make a lot more sense.
It does. Yeah.
And you can't understand what the Matrix is when you are within it, right? You have to first exit out,
Right.
and then you can develop this understanding. And so they will tell you that is what we can provide, because we have used our critical theory to step outside of the existing system. We can see it from the outside, and you can see it too if you adopt this lens that
We
we
have
are
to
bringing.
unplug the thing from the back of your head.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
So it is fundamentally based upon requiring that you trust on the front end that they have stepped outside of the matrix. That you have to trust that there is a matrix, and you have to trust them that they have stepped outside of it and that they know how to help you step outside of it. So this is a case of them claiming special knowledge, inaccessible to anyone who has not followed the same path that they have. It's very, very important that this is I would argue it is a faith. that they have developed a Marxian faith, that they have developed this special, unique knowledge through their process of developing critical consciousness.
They went to the mountain and they've come back down with the rules they will impart to you if by your chance you will also come to the altar with me. I will share that with you.
Yes,
Okay.
they will tell you that it is scientific. But they're using the Marxian notion of being scientific, which is not what any of us would normally understand the word to mean.
Okay.
It's not based upon evidence and inquiry and testing and hypothesis development and engaging with your critics. It's based upon the pure assertion that you're in the matrix, the race matrix,
Okay.
right? So we take this notion from Horkheimer, and you jump forward about 30 years. His roughly his successor, who was an absolute academic rock star in the 1960s by the name of Herbert Marcuse. And he was struggling with, a lot of the critical theorists were struggling with something that they'd realized, which is that the communist revolution was not overtaking the West, that capitalism and Western liberalism, democracy, all of these things were effectively they were allowing the working class to achieve success and happiness. People were pretty happy with their freedom to pursue their own interests. Imperfect though the system may be,
Okay.
the working classes were lost. And so Marcuse suggested, well, we need to find a new source of revolutionary zeal, as he put it. And he referred, his eventual choice was, we need to focus on not on economics and money, but we need to focus on identity, specifically within the ghetto population. His words.
That was his words.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So this within a few years, we see the emergence of critical legal studies, which is the direct precursor to CRT. Derek Bell and Alan Freeman and Derek Bell's PhD student, Kimberly Crenshaw, all three of them sort of working to develop, these are the biggest names in the field at least, to develop this notion of how civil rights has been, it's one of those things like where it sounds like civil rights are good for race relations and for equality, but the argument that they used was it's a veneer. It hides the actual racism that's built into the system and thus makes it more pernicious because it's harder to see and therefore we can't eliminate it as easily.
It's like basically painting over black dangerous mold with white out.
That would
Yeah,
be a good
I mean,
analogy of how
it's
they're.
your basement's got all the mold that's dangerous in it. Instead of eradicating the mold, we're just going to paint over it with some seal block, and it's going to look great, but it's still probably going to kill us as we breathe it in. That's
Right.
that would kind of be their is dumbing it down for Clint again. Okay.
Yeah. And Bell is perhaps best known for his, I would argue, paranoid, but they would argue accurate description of why the racial bourgeoisie, uh, whites and the white adjacent folks, and the uh, Larry Elders of the world, um, why they put in place things like civil rights and affirmative action and whatnot. And his argument, he called it interest convergence. The only time that the racial bourgeoisie will act in a way that seems like it's helping the racially oppressed is when they perceive the interests as aligning, right? When they see that they can benefit off of it. So it's this very cynical approach where anytime you see something that looks good, you have to look for the inevitably present secret racist motivations behind that thing.
Oh, is that their take on the movement in the 60s and 70s, the Martin Luther Kings? I mean, is that they're saying that only because they come to this convergence of interest with people of different races, that's it? There's just an opportunity to gain some control and maybe to better my life a little bit. Is that right?
They don't typically go directly after Martin Luther King Jr.
Well, no, but I mean, if they're throwing the whole movement under the bus Again, that you're not saying that. I guess maybe I'm misstating it.
Okay,
Clear me up a little
you're
bit.
not.
Okay.
You're not.
Okay.
You're absolutely on the right path. So
I feel like
I
my
referred
teacher's going, Clint, you're so close to getting it, buddy.
no, you're dead on. Um, they don't name drop MLK Jr. when they're criticizing these things.
Oh,
So let me
okay.
give you an example.
Uh-huh.
I referred earlier to Delgado and Stefanchik's Critical Race Theory and Introduction. This is the very first paragraph. This is basically written for a general audience, so you could give it out to high schoolers if you wanted to.
Okay.
All right. The critical race theory movement is a collection of activists and scholars engaged in studying and transforming the relationship among race, racism, and power. The movement considers many of the same issues that conventional civil rights and ethnic studies discourses take up, but places them in a broader perspective that includes economics, history, setting, group and self interest, and emotions and the unconscious. Here's the key part. Unlike traditional civil rights discourse, which stresses incrementalism and step by step progress, critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law.
Oh, so wait, whoa, hold on a second. Neutral principles of constitutional law. That's under the umbrella of what? They're critical. They said it's not what?
That's something that they are questioning, something that they criticize. Yes.
Basically, they're saying we don't believe that those laws can be neutral. I got you. Okay. Yeah,
They're saying that
constitutional
any
law.
attempt at
Yeah,
neutrality
is
is wrong
gotcha.
because
Okay.
you have to be race conscious,
Okay.
right? And the sort of a neutral principle of constitutional law, right? Person A who happens to have one skin color, person B who happens to have another skin color, they commit the same crime, they should have the same punishment,
Right. Gotcha. Okay.
right? That would be a neutral principle. But this is something that they question and that they push back against,
Gotcha. Okay.
along with, as noted, traditional civil rights.
Yeah.
Right. This is 45 years after the civil rights movement when this is written. So, and I can tell you, based upon their criticisms, they are directly going after the arguments made by Martin Luther King Jr., especially the ideals of being colorblind, the ideals of considering people on the basis of the quality of their character rather than the happenstance of their birth.
Okay.
They see that as incrementalism. They see that as papering over or painting over the mold, and not dealing with it directly.
Okay.
It is a revolutionary approach, which is another thing that tells you it's Marxian.
Okay.
All right. So, yeah. So Marcuse, that's critical legal studies develops in that context into critical race theory in the late 80s, with the mother of CRT, which is Kimberly Crenshaw. You'll see her going on the news, being interviewed by Joy Reid and whatnot. She's very, very well known, and she was the one that her most influential paper that I did reference as a source, Mapping the Margins in 1991. She made a very legitimate point in that paper that deserves to be acknowledged, though it is not a new, or for that matter, particularly impressive point, frankly. So one of the things that she was pointing out in that paper is you can have racism interacting with other characteristics. So, for example, if a company says, "Hey, we're committed to being diverse and inclusive," and we do that by race, and say they've got a bunch of black men who they've hired, and we do that by gender, and so they've got a bunch of white women that they've hired, but they have no black women. So you can argue in that case, well, does this company have a problem with black women specifically?
Right.
Right? That combination of factors can be something that would be invisible if you're only looking at race or gender by itself.
And nowhere in here do we talk about being qualified for whatever positions, right? I just want to make sure I
No.
understand. Okay. All right. Keep going. All right.
Yeah, that's the current system. That's the matrix talking for you right there.
Yeah, I understand. I feel the plug in the back of my head there, so it gets a little
Thank you, Agent
uncomfortable.
Powell.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, yeah, merit is not really considered.
okay.
So she takes from and the reason why that's not new or frankly all that interesting is that that's what we in the world of statistics would call two interacting variables, right? You have one variable that has an effect on your outcome and another one that has an effect on your outcome. But when you have both of them together, the combination creates something different and unique, like we talked about sort of with the race and gender diversity
And it's like 2
approach.
chemicals coming together, right? One
Yeah,
chemical affects metal this way, the other one affects it that way. You combine the chemicals, then put it on the metal, you get something different. You're like, "Wow, well, look at there. That's something
that's
we."
perfect.
Yeah.
Yes, those are interacting chemicals, and yeah.
Okay.
So that's sort of the argument that she's making, and the reason why she made it is that she wanted to use these intersecting categories of identity as a means of pulling together and binding together all of these different identity based movements.
Mhm.
So, whether it was feminism, whether it was queer theory, whether it was critical race theory, disability studies, you can go on. Um, this was a means to say, hey, these are all important and they all interact, and we all need to band together under sort of the banner of a single political force.
Yeah, like a coalition of the oppressed.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And this was the sort of the theoretical means through which they did it. And out of all of this, we see the emergence of critical race theory into the 2000s, into the 2000 teens. And many of you will have heard of, many of our listeners will have heard of sort of how this has been brought out into the broader culture through people like Robin DiAngelo, who wrote a book called White Fragility. Um, and she exemplifies this notion that the racism is always there. It just may not be visible unless you're trained to find it.
Right.
When she pointed this is a quote from her in a 2011 paper. The question is not did racism did take place, but rather in what ways did racism manifest in this specific context? Again, you have to operate on this assumption, this presupposition that racism is always there. It's
Yeah,
always in
you
place.
can't get to that point unless you're looking for it everywhere. And if you look for it everywhere, you'll find it.
And they will
Because
tell you how to
yeah,
look for it.
right. Okay.
Um, another example that we talked about or mentioned earlier, Ibram Kendi, who wrote the 2019 book How to Be an Anti-Racist, within which he also argued that the solution, one of the solutions to the problem, is to create a federal department of anti-racism, run by people who are trained to understand racism, which is to say, critical race theorists, that would oversee every policy implemented in at every level of the state and federal government to see whether or not it created differences in racial groups that disfavor one or more minorities. They don't care if it goes in the opposite direction, right? If white people are making less money than every other racial group, that's fine. But if, say, if one minority group makes more than another, that might be a problem. If whites are making more than another minority group, that's a problem. But of note, this is not a department that would be subject to any separation of powers. It would have total oversight over every other branch of government.
Well, you have
So
to be
when
trained. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah.
I said that I agree with James Lindsay's definition of critical race theory as calling everything racist until you control it, this is an example, right? That control is the ultimate goal here, because they believe that only when the country is taken over and the revolution occurs and the critical race theory lens is brought to bear by those in control,
Mhm.
can things actually change for the better.
All right. Can I say this 2 things real quick, dumb it down again for Clint? One, go back everybody and listen to the podcast we did on equity versus equality, because I think that is a big play in this too. if there's an inequity in outcome, then that means, according to this philosophy, someone has been oppressed. It's not just it's not a natural consequence of talent or merit or hard work or other things that may be some privilege. Maybe maybe you're an African American, but you're born into a good family, that's got more money, and all of a sudden, that data is excluded on a lot of these things because that doesn't fit the narrative. But equity versus equality I would assume, plays a big role in this. And then the other thing, that when you were just saying about control, I want to say this back to you. I walk into the department where Matthew is. There's 10 people. I am in charge of figuring out whether you are meeting the standards to the new organization, the state, the administrative state thing I'm in charge of, which is the anti-racist, right? I walk in and 4 of you don't pass my test. You say something a little weird. I've looked at your history, send you to re-education, retake the test. I start looking at things. If things don't meet my critical eye, I just simply replace you until I either replace you with someone that agrees with me, or you start stepping and fetching the way I need you to. And now all of a sudden, I've gotten control of the institution, not by electoral vote, not by consensus, and not by even force, really. I've got it simply by bending your will to my ideology on the backside. I make the meal in the back in the kitchen, and I bring it out to serve to you. So it doesn't matter who's cooking in the back. Everybody's going to eat basically the same food made the same way.
Yeah, they cannot be accountable to anyone within the existing system.
As soon as you stand up against it, you're gone. Apparently you don't, you violated the anti-racist policies we have in place, Matthew. I'll send you to a school. You can re-educate yourself, or you can step down, or I'll just replace you to get somebody that agrees with me. And
you
now all of a
can't be
sudden,
accountable to anyone within the matrix if you're looking to tear down the matrix.
there we go. And all of a sudden now I've got control of the institutions, and nobody really knows it's happened because it's this admin state over here that's getting lost in the headlines of, did Biden have ice cream, and did Trump send out a stupid AI video? Whatever. Okay. Sorry, I interrupt with my little digressions.
No, you're absolutely right. So that brings us more or less to today. So we're that should give our listeners kind of a sense of how things progressed, what the basic premises are, how it functions, what critical race theorists believe about the nature of the world, Western society especially, and how it must be revolutionized.
All right, so I'm gonna do this kind of as we get to how it's being used nowadays. I'm gonna set this up for you. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I'm gonna add some narrative. This is Clint's thing, and then I'm gonna hand it off with you because I'm gonna give you what I hear on the talking heads. It's not being used. This is not something that's happening in the world we get. Oh, look, man, this girl reaches out to me all the time. Apparently, I always pop up on her timeline, and she'd like to join my circle of friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what dude is in their basement doing this, but man, God bless you. I'm not going to be a good target for you because I don't click on any of this stuff, but I hope you have a good day. And I think your mom said the meatloaf's done. So, all right, here's 2 examples. I'm about to get hacked now. So whatever happens to Clint's page after pissing off that person. I want to say this to you real quick, though. There's 2 examples or 2 things I want to bring up that frustrate me to no end about Florida. These are specific things that if we would just read headlines, I think we would understand better. One, you hear all the time, Florida's banned African American studies, and DeSantis has banned it. Me and Jeff Stiles, my buddy, have this conversation. He didn't ban it. As a matter of fact, African American studies is required in Florida. What they did, and there's a great tweet by Manny Diaz, but what they did is they saw when the new curriculum came out that there was several examples of critical race theory, critical queer theory, all these different things we're talking about were embedded into the curriculum. There was 5 or 6 points. It wasn't the whole thing. And they just sent it back and said, hey, remove those things and we're good to go. They removed them. And on the other side of that, it was still mandatory to take African American. You have to learn about African American history in Florida. Second thing, also Florida. I saw this headline. It was brought up to me. I saw people sharing it. DeSantis has banned that you can talk about the race of Rosa Parks. Did you read that headline?
No, I didn't hear
that.
Yeah,
you can't. And everybody, I saw all my friends that hate DeSantis, man, and then you read about it. And what it was, Florida had nothing to do with it. The publisher trying to make a point, I think, and as an overreaction by their own admission, edited the curriculum and took out the race of Rosa Parks, sent it to Florida. Florida called it and said, hey, this is an overreaction. The publisher basically resubmitted it, putting the race back in there as it should have been to begin with, because Rosa Parks is a badass. And so what bothers me about this is if you go by the headlines, you would go, oh, well, there are people out there that just don't want us to learn about African American history. And that's not the case. It's what people are trying to do with these headlines. The last thing I will say, and then I'm going to come to you with the question. I'm listening to you now for almost an hour. And I still think it goes back to money and poverty and leverage of power. And I think they will use anything. And here's what I mean by that. As soon as you see someone who is well known in the LBGTQ, I'm missing an initial. I really don't mean that as an insult. I can't remember it. I don't talk about it that much. But as soon as you see someone in that realm, they become powerful. They get a better life. A lot of these people that come through the Marxist training forget they're not supposed to do this. BLM, get the mansions. They get the cars. They disperse all the money. There's really no money there anymore. Same with anybody that's called a feminist. If you fall on one side of it, what bothers me about this is it seems like some people are just honest about it. But once the power and the money has been achieved and raked in, they buy the homes with the walls and get the guns to protect them. And how I can tell is because they get the nice homes. They build the walls. They don't have to, those people don't have to operate by COVID standards. We watch them going out and violating them all the time. So in my world, I don't understand why we can't take a step back and go, wait a minute. If we see Marxist theories built into this and people using it to leverage power, money, and control, then they go and use that to do the very same thing they're complaining about. Why are we giving money and credence to these ideologies? Now, I know that is true in churches too. You can find hypocrites and people that go against ideologies all the time. With that being said, do you have anything to say on my little rant? I had to throw that in there to scratch my narrative itch. If you don't have anything to add, I will ask you the question.
So I think you're right to ask the question of, is this just about acquiring power? Now, for a field that focuses so heavily on power dynamics and power relations, that's a legitimate question to ask, right? You can have people that are just interested in, like, how does power function? What are the ways that it's used? You could have people that are interested in power, like who has the power, and how does that change over time? What characterizes the transition between different groups being in power? And you can also be interested in power because you want it, and you have to be able to differentiate between those three. And my argument is overwhelmingly the folks that are in this genuinely do believe that they need the power.
They just know better than me and you.
Right. They have that special knowledge. They've been outside the matrix. They can save us if only we listen and we follow their prescriptions and adopt the lens that they have found through this process of critical consciousness raising. So I don't I don't think you're wrong to ask that question. I think there almost inevitably there's going to be people that really genuinely just are interested in sort of the academic question of how power functions and how it transfers. But you're inevitably also in a field that is so focused on power.
Yeah,
you're going to draw in people that are actually interested in having it.
And like me and you, Eric, you and Eric talk about all the time, the ability to question who's in power, why they're in power, those are all good things. Critical thinking is vital. I want my kids to learn to critically think. I want to critically question things. It's when you take these definitions, kind of morph them to fit something that's different and try to sneak it in underneath a different headline that bothers me. So my question to you, sir, is, we alluded to it earlier. I hear this from talking heads all the time. Listen, CRT is nothing but a myth by the conservatives or the Republican Party or those who just want to racist. It's not being used. We're gaslighting people. It's a straw man, whatever, debate term we want to use, however we want to minimize it. And it drives people insane because We see businesses, sending people to be retrained. We see the schools and the parents at school board meetings. There's the examples of what's going on in Florida in curriculum. I know teachers that will tell you there are things they are not comfortable teaching sometimes. I know that. And so with all, we see the libs of TikTok, we see all of this. Is it being used in today's curriculum in business and entertainment, social work, and social media? Is it, sir?
Absolutely, it is.
You're a
Um,
liar. You're a bigot.
so
I'm just
there
kidding.
are
You're
a
not.
couple of, I think, when you hear someone suggest that, especially if you're actually in conversation with them, there are a few ways that you can respond with this that I think are irrefutable. There's just no way around it.
Okay.
One, anyone who says that it's not an education, I have to wonder: do they hate Gloria Ladson Billings? Why are they trying to deny the existence of Gloria Ladson Billings, the most famous uh, theorist of critical race theory in education? She's been writing since the 1990s. Okay, she just wrote a book in 2021 called "Critical Race Theory in Education: A Scholar's Journey," where she talks about uh, confusion and misconceptions that education researchers have around race and inequality. Uh, so, one, you're denying the existence of the most famous critical race theorist in education.
Okay.
Why do you hate that person? I mean, it's.
It's
I'm being a little bit,
facetious. Yeah, I get it.
yeah, facetious, but like, do you not know about Gloria Ladson Billings? Okay,
Right.
she's been around for 25 years, working on this stuff. Number two, and this is perhaps the easiest thing, if you can't remember Billings' name, is just go on your preferred search engine and look up the phrase critical race theory, K through 12 education, and look for all the books that have been published.
Oh, really? Really?
Hmm.
Okay.
It's all over the place. You can find, I'm scrolling, uh, not difficult at all to find a ton. Handbook of Critical Race Theory in Education, Critical Race Theory in Teacher Education, Critical Race Theory in Education, All God's Children Got a Song, Critical Race Theory in Education, Envisioning a Critical Race Praxis in K through 12 Education, Critical Race Theory, The Cutting Edge, um, Critical Race Theory in Education, A Scholar's Journey. Like we can go on and on and on and on. So if you think that all of these books that have been written and are being distributed to people who are studying education are not trying to teach people how to put critical race theory into education, you're I think you're a crazy person, frankly. You're denying the influence, the massive influence that would be necessary for this number of books to be out there. And number the third one, which is a bit more technical, is if you understand the structure of what it is that critical race theory is trying to do, which is it's trying to raise race consciousness in everyone to tear down the matrix. If you understand what it is trying to do and how it sees the world, then all you have to do is ask if the ideas and of critical race theory are being advanced, right? You might say, well, no one's teaching physics to 2-year-olds. Well, I mean, no one's like doing a course on like hydrodynamics or anything, force and vectors, whatever. No, they're not taking college level courses in it, but you can still easily talk about the some of the more fundamental basic principles of physics
It's called
with
laying a
them.
foundation. You go to
Yeah,
third grade to get to seventh grade at some point in time, and they add on what you have learned previously. So they're not going to start off saying things like anti-racism, or they're not going to start using words like abolitionist teaching. They're not going to. I'm looking at a dictionary right now of things that you can look for in curriculum. I mean, I'm just going through here. Anti-bias training, anti-blackness, anti-racism, centering, colorism, conscious bias, critical ethnic studies. And I'm just going to keep giving you a few. I want people to understand. You can go look this up. Cultural appropriation, cultural awareness, cultural let's see if I go back. Yeah. relevance. Yeah.
Representation. Oh yeah,
Sorry.
culturally relevant pedagogy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pedagogy's in here, diversity
Mhm.
training, all of these things, and it goes. There's a equity versus equality. I'm telling you, it's hegemony. How do you say that word again? You're smart.
Hegemony.
Yeah, thank you very much. Anyway, inclusivity, education, institutional bias. There's these lists, and I know I'm ranting, but there's a list of things that if you're reading the curriculum, it's sprinkled in. I'm looking at stuff right now that it's not going to come out and said CRT on it, but they are derivatives of leftover effects of, and I think intentionally pulled from and placed into other things. It's almost like when you're writing a code and they just change a little bit in the code that you don't notice, but the outcome's a completely different thing when you're doing the internet. Back to the matrix thing, right? I got 1,000 digits across the top in my little code bar here, the CRL. I replace this one, this one, this one, and it takes me to a different place. I get a different outcome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can teach a lot of these ideas in a more sort of basic way, using none of those terms. Just like you don't have to use any of the physics terms to teach kids about states of matter, right? They understand that you can teach at a level that will get through to them and be accessible to them, right? We've come up with the example here of of the matrix, which if I can come up with an example that is accessible to the general audience, I guarantee you the critical race theorists can come up with examples and explanatory analogies that can be accessible to a second grader.
Right.
Have they
Yeah.
done? Absolutely. A lot of these books are precisely about that very problem of how do you get it into the curriculum in a way that is accessible to your students. Um, so yeah, it absolutely is an education. They have been talking about that for decades, about the intent to get it into education. Um, in fact, the book Critical Race Theory and Introduction does address that question as well. I don't have the page pulled up, but it was written, I think it last updated 10 or 12 years ago, maybe, is the version that I have. And they were talking about how uh, critical race theory has become, was it indistinguishable from race scholarship? That may have been Kimberly Crenshaw that said that, actually.
Right.
Um, but effectively, they've cornered the market when it comes to discussions on what racism is, how it functions, and how we have to behave in order to deal with it.
I'm trying to find this real quick. So, Florida, the Department of Florida, it seems like on the cutting edge of this. They released 2 examples of math problems that gave examples where critical race theory was actually being used in the books in the curriculum. And I can't find them real quick. I mean, I'm reading articles, and that's the other thing about the news stuff, man. Listen, I know y'all got to get clicks. Get to the meat of it. You got 2 seconds for me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Um,
Um, yeah, and
well, here's
it is showing up.
yeah.
You found it?
Well, it just says, "What me?" Question marks. What me? A racist? More than 2 million people have tested their racial prejudice using an online version of implicit association test. Most groups' average scores fall between slight and moderate bias, but the differences among groups by age and by political identification are intriguing. And then it gives this quiz that people can take and find out if you're a racist or not, basically, how far on the racist scheme you. And that is, and if you keep reading it, it's a CBS affiliate in Florida. So it's not like I'm having to go to a fringe website. But if you keep reading it, there's another example that does basically the same thing. It starts in high school, middle school, categorizing Clint. I'm white, so I am an oppressor. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm an oppressor. My buddy Matthew, who's African American, is the oppressed. And immediately I am going to start being, if I've not handled it correctly, I can learn to be bitter against Clint, and Clint's going to learn to feel inferior. And I've said this so many times. I do not understand why we want our nation to have a bad self-image. I'm not saying we don't acknowledge the evils, but we teach our kids that we are good and bad and how to navigate, be more good than bad, and work through that. And I don't understand why we want any less of our nation, because we see what happens when America's weak. Look at the world around us. I know I went on a little tangent there, but there's 2 examples of how CRT has slid into the curriculum. And if our school boards and our state governments aren't diligent on this, the federal government's not going to help with it. If they're not catching it, your kids are going to go to school And these are just a few examples and terms we've given today of how it can be used and implied, much less what's being said that's not in the books. So there's my
Absolutely.
take on it.
And yeah, you make a very important point when you talk about, having the oppressor or the oppressed identity, and how incredibly crucial that can be to the development of children. You, a historical example that many of you will be familiar with, is that during Mao's program of revolution, there were 5 black identity categories and 5 red identity categories, and you wanted to have a red identity. Right? That was the way that you showed your revolutionary zeal. You did not want to have a black identity, so everyone was categorized under one or more of these identity categories from a young age. You may be the kid of, maybe your parents were landowners or owned a business.
Now you become ashamed of yourself, right?
Now you have a black
Yeah.
identity within the Maoist system.
Mm.
And I want to say that actually extended 2 or 3 generations beyond the person with the black identity. The only way to deal with it was to have was to explicitly seek the red identity, right? So the core, or the comparable example here is, you have to become an anti-racist,
Right.
right? You have to adopt the good identity in order to begin to see and understand how the system should be revolutionized, what the problems are. So yeah, James Lindsay describes it as sort of the modern woke movement as Maoism with American characteristics, or Western characteristics.
Yeah, it's like a virus. It's mutated.
It's adapted.
It's adapted.
And in fact, there was a paper written back in 2015 or 2016 by a couple of women's studies ladies that did explicitly describe the critical theory within women's studies as being like a virus.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not a comparison that is new. Even they make it themselves. If you understand how the teaching of critical consciousness must take place within their system.
I'm going to say one last thing. I'm going to let you wrap it up, unless there's something else you want to add after that. But one of the things that seems common sense to me, again, has been removed from so many of these conversations. The best way to change people's minds is, if I try to change your mind and you're 30, I've got a hard row to hoe. If I try to change your mind, or just mold your mind when you're 5, it is not that hard, because I can convince you that you're Superman when you're 5. I can convince you that you can jump off a table and not get hurt. I can convince you of anything when you're 5. You can drink invisible tea from a cup with your dad, and you think you're having tea, right? And so I'm a princess. I'm whatever I can be whatever I want to be. And so it's easier to take a 5, 8, 9-year old and say, hey, we then don't have to change anything. We then have the 30-year-old we want, because it's a byproduct. The sooner we can get you on the conveyor belt, the better. Thank you, Janelle, for watching.
Almost everything.
Yeah.
Or maybe everything is downstream from education.
And I don't understand why this is that hard to understand. I mean, I think it is. I think it's okay to indoctrinate our kids with some stuff, right? We want our kids to know it's okay to treat your neighbor right. I want my kid to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I want him to be a patriotic person. I also want him to think critically about things and question and ask. I'm not saying that we don't train our kids in certain ways. I'm saying we as the adults have to be intentional about what we train our kids, and not all things are created equal.
Absolutely.
Wrap us up,
Yeah.
Matthew. What did I forget to ask, man?
It's just some examples outside of education that might be helpful.
Yeah.
Several of you may have seen Coca-Cola's training program that was teaching its employees how to be less white.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, of course, that sounds massively racist to the general audience, and it should.
Yeah.
But when you understand that they consider whiteness to be a form of property, right? That's why they're saying how to be, to be less white is something that Robin DiAngelo has explicitly advocated for people to be. And in fact, she wrote an entire book called Nice Racism that came out after White Fragility, which was arguing that white progressives who believe that they get it, they understand racism, are doing more, I want to say the phrase was daily damage to people of color. So it's this, all she can advocate for is you need to be less white. You need to somehow abolish this racial bourgeois property that you possess. Of course, the only way to do that is to become anti-racist. So you'll see lots of examples using the CRT language and principles all across corporations. We've talked about how that's being driven by other factors, environmental, social, and governance factors, which we can get into in
We've
some more
seen it in our
detail.
military. We've seen it in our
Yeah.
government, the new standards that are implemented. And I want to say this to you real quick, and we'll get to let you finish up. All I have to do is replace the oppressor and the oppressed, and this model, this template can be used in queer studies. It can be used in when we're talking about the dynamics in feminism. It can be used in just about anything, because all I really need is an oppressor and an oppressed. Then I can start using the same terminology, correct?
Yeah, it is structurally almost identical to all of these other theories, whether you're talking, like you said, queer theory, post-colonial theory, disability studies, feminism,
Yeah.
or Marxist feminism. Um, you largely you just switch out the nouns and you get exactly the same argument. That has been crucial for me in understanding like how they're all structurally just doing the same thing. They're just talking about different stuff
Okay.
the same way. Another recent example, this just came out. I just saw this today. Um, you were talking about how merit is not being considered and how that's a problem.
Yeah.
It might be important to consider that when it comes to things like building bridges and buildings and firefighters and
Yeah.
whatnot.
Pilots.
But there's a there's a report that just came out that the Seattle firefighters are now being considered for promotion on the basis of largely their understanding of Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. It's in the testing
See, and what
for
frustrates
promotion
me
to
about
lieutenant.
this is it gives people an open door to say, "What do you mean, man? You don't think African Americans can be leaders?" And that argument ticks me off so much. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying because you're African American doesn't mean you're automatically a good leader. Just like being a Caucasian doesn't mean you're automatically a good leader. Maybe things should be released on the merit of how you handle the job, the test, all of these things. And that's the part that frustrates me. One of the things we've talked about many times is these type of conversations, these type of ideologies take away from us addressing real racism, real assholes, real discrepancies between men and women, or real people that have vile thoughts about homosexuals in their brain. We miss those conversations because everything is everything, and because everything is everything, nothing is nothing. And now all of a sudden we're in this big world where, man, if I'm a predator, if I'm an oppressor, I can hide right in front of you. I just get to hide in front of you. All right, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you overuse these terms and it begins to apply to absolutely everything, like Crenshaw applies racism to, in a way that's similar to, water and a fish that doesn't know it's wet because it's swimming in it all the time.
Yeah.
That's where it goes. Is it? Yeah. Now, of course, that's in their perspective, that would be Agent Durham representing the views of the Matrix.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
But I think it is absolutely crucial to understand that what they're doing fundamentally is saying we have special ways of knowing, special, what you could call it, they call it a lens, but you could call it a seeing stone, right? That allows them to see the invisible in ways that you can't possibly know. That is the claim. That is the central claim. They can see it, you don't. So they are claiming special knowledge about the world. And how they got there, all you can do is be like them, and then you'll somehow figure it out. It's not. This is different from if Clint, if you were to say, Matthew, I got this shipment of, I don't know, a beer stein from Germany.
Yeah.
Right. And I said, "Oh, cool. How do you know it came from Germany?" And I said, "Well," and you say, "Well, it's on the box."
Yeah.
I could go to Germany, and I could say, go to the company and say, did you send this beer stein to Clint? Right? I could directly confirm what it is that you're saying without adopting any of your values whatsoever, any of your perspectives, nothing. Right? Evidence is something I can use in those kinds of contexts. You cannot use it with critical race theory.
I hate to say this, and then I'm gonna have to wrap it up. I got to, but I'm gonna let you wrap it up, of course. But this is one of those elements that I think confirms what I believe, and you and I have had this conversation. Wokeism, but especially this particular tenet, is religious, because once you start saying that I have the magic and you don't because I've been through the training and you haven't, and you can't see it till you do what I've done an altar call. I've asked you to come down front. I've asked you to agree with the scriptures that I'm reading. And listen, I'm a Christian, right? But I'm saying it sounds a lot like a church service where at the end of it, does anybody in here think that they have a problem with privilege and are too white? And if so, I'd like you to come down front. We will start the process of your salvation, because only those who take the magic word, say the magic words, or have the magic conversion of brain of the perspective, only you then will see the true sinfulness of you.
A lot of people think that these are not conversations about religion that we're having. And I think they fundamentally mistake, like when they think, well, this is about race, or this is about sex or gender, or this is about colonialism, or this is about economic oppression. It's not. Marx, who created this structure, was not an economist. He was not a philosopher. He was a theologian. He was doing theology. He was creating a religion where he had special knowledge and insight into the nature of humanity and how it could be improved. That same structure runs precisely through all of these different critical theories into critical race theory. And I agree, they should be categorized formally as a religion with all of the protections and immunities and limits legally that other religions have.
Yeah, and Janelle, last one also. It says, "I am God. I determine what is right and wrong." That's
That would be the
basically.
perspective that they have. Yeah, that
Yeah.
they have achieved the godlike perspective from outside of the matrix. Yeah.
Matthew, anything you need to add before we leave? Because I want to make sure that you did a lot of work preparing for this. First of all, thank you so much for doing this, and I want to make sure that anything that is not left on the table, especially from on your end.
Nope. I appreciate everybody for listening, and when I get canceled,
We'll get you a job, dude.
pour one out for me.
Yeah, we'll get you a job, man. I got plenty. Listen, I got a lot of friends. It's gonna be hard to cancel us, dude.
And I don't got my homesteading, so
Yeah, we'll pull you along. We'll I'm telling you, you're gonna start checking red boxes, man. I hate to break it to you. Yeah, that's just see. I can see him bristling now, but we'll figure it out. If something does happen, let me know. We've got the cavalry coming to you.
Cool.
All right, see you, buddy. Thank you, man, very much.
All right,
Bye, everybody.
sure. Take care, everyone.